Welcome to Modern Art Oxford, and welcome to This Image is No Longer Available. It's been a day of lots of different events, screenings, live stream, performances, live curating, as well as some films and talks, things happening upstairs as well. I'll go over some of that a bit later. My name's Tom Milnes. I helped organise this event today. I'm the Curator of Digital Artist Residency. Digital Artist Residency is an independent digital exhibition initiative. It organises curated net art exhibitions, provides opportunities for artists exploring breadth of digital or post-digital practice. DAR also organises experimental exhibitions exploring crossovers between digital and the physical. And this includes exhibitions which engage with social practice and augmented reality, much like the project with Andy Abbott, which we did at the Museum of Oxford last year, which involved an augmented reality poetry recital around the city of Oxford, with a map to help you navigate, and it was all performed by Ivor Wanderlust, the punk performance poet. As well as DAR also organises an emerging artist in residence programme, which we did a couple of years ago, 2017, along with Avada. And the exhibition that came out of that was Touching, Not Touching. And I'm delighted to say that we've got Arts Council funding for that again this year, so yay. That's going to happen again for 6 new recent graduates in order to provide funding and give them the opportunity to develop new work and exhibition. DAR came about due to the influence of digital practice and critical discourse artists using this medium. And it came out about because the internet is a place which holds our most intimate information, houses our photos, records our dating history, stores our passwords and memories. We ask it questions we would not ask any other human. It is a resource, it is entertainment, it provides companionship and employment, yet it has physicality. It's a very real material structure and a demand for resources. It has affected society, culture and the environment more than any other technological change in our lifetime. So this digital world has a very physical effect on our lives, with the boundaries between these worlds becoming more blurred all the time. So joining me today in an effort to understand these crossovers, effects, and complex entanglements between the material and the digital are 3 practitioners who approach these issues in from different angles. Each speaker will give a short presentation, followed by a panel discussion along the themes of the material and the digital based on their practices. So there'll be an opportunity for questions afterwards. First, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Kathryn Eccles. So Kathryn Eccles is a research fellow at Oxford Internet Institute. Kathryn's research investigates the impact of new technologies on humanities and how the reorganisation of cultural heritage occurs in the digital world. She'll be presenting to us today about her work with Cabinet and talking about her research in digitising collections. So please welcome Kathryn Eccles.
Great, thank you so much. Like Tom said, I'm here today to talk about one aspect of my work, which is a project called Cabinet. So Cabinet came about after probably 8 or 9 years of looking at how digitisation had been transforming the practice of mostly scholars to start with, and then more and more the public as these archives were opening up. But what we were largely looking at in the first part of that period of study was flat things, so 2D things, digitised newspapers, digitised records, things where really a lot of the focus. So a lot of the focus was on the text or the numbers, the words that you could extract from these documents, and then you could, by transforming those into a different kind of data, you could transform the way that you looked at them. You could sift through it. You could organise it in different ways. And that really is quite a different type of practice from when you start to transform objects in museum collections. So I thought I would talk a little bit more about cabinet, because that throws up lots more challenges in terms of thinking about what happens when we digitise a collection and what the thing is that we have once we've digitised something. So we use a technique called photogrammetry, which I'm sure lots of you are familiar with. Those of you who aren't, it essentially what we do is we take lots and lots of photographs of objects. We move around objects in order to capture them from every angle. And then we use a piece of software that stitches those together and creates this sort of weird chicken wire style mesh. And so once we've done that, what we do is we lay the photographic texture over the top, and what you get is a movable object, something you can turn over, you can zoom in on, you can examine very tiny features of. So lots of the objects, all of the objects I'm going to be talking about today are from Oxford's museum collections. Lots of them were marked at the point at which they entered the museums, and you can read all of those little inscriptions by zooming in really carefully. You can see areas of damage. You can look at even fingerprints in certain objects. You can look at the way that something has been crafted. It's a really different type of encounter with the object than I think you would be allowed, even if you were lucky enough to get through the doors and have a handling session. You don't have to put the gloves on. You don't have to feel sort of inhibited, as I always do in those sorts of sessions. You don't have to worry about dropping it on the floor or handling it wrongly, looking at the wrong area of detail. It gives you a very intimate experience of examining an object in the way that I think we all feel that we want to. The affordances of when we enter a museum are all about touch. That, you know, we want to touch everything, we want to turn it over, we want to, you know, if you see a cup, you want to pick it up. All of those things are more possible, I think, in this digital realm than they are in a traditional type of museum. So what's the point? Well, here are some examples of courses that we've built for students in the university using this technique, allowing them to examine objects in ways that they would never really be able to in the ordinary run of things. So this is a brilliant course in English literature where the focus was on the impact of the classics on everyday life in 19th century culture. And the person who created this course is a professor called Christine Gerard. She said, you know, she'd sort of started to dread this course because people felt that it was a bit dry and a bit dusty, and when you talk about these things, it's very hard to convey the message. But when you actually put the object into the hands of the student as you're lecturing, as you're talking through the themes, letting them turn something over and examine the exact image that you're talking about, that's a very, very different kind of teaching, and it has really transformed her work. And she won this prize for her teaching that was nominated by the students. So it really does sort of add layers and layers of interest to the students' experience. And I think it builds, like I said, it builds intimacy with an object. So we recently had some of our digitised objects up on the screens in the Western Library. As you enter the Western Library, there are 2 touch screens. And the library had recently acquired a coffer, a Gothic coffer, a box with a very interesting, beautifully painted lid. And we were able to digitise it very shortly before it went into Perspex box, into a really wonderfully rich exhibition about boxes. And what we noticed as visitors were walking in, they were spending quite a lot of time, sort of 10, 15 minutes, examining the box on the screen, examining every angle, turning it around, looking at the image, and then walking around to see where the exhibition was happening so that they could get a closer look. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about what happens when you digitise things. It does give you just a different view and a different way of thinking about an object. So why do people object to things like this? Well, I think it's because of this. I think
people feel that if you're viewing a museum through a screen, or you're interrupting that immediacy of the experience with an object in a museum or an artifact, then somehow you're losing the authenticity, you're losing that moment of connection, that thing I was talking about where, you know, the cup handles towards you, you just want to pick it up. People feel that that's being interrupted by a screen, by a digital experience. I personally feel like it might be the opposite, and that's what my research is currently about. It's trying to look at actually what is it that's happening? Are people actually feeling closer to the object? Do they feel like they could do more with it? Do they know more about it? Does that encounter with the real then hold something different? And I think there's also something really interesting about whether this object, which is from the Hyder collections in the Pitt Rivers Museum, this is the digitised object, so this is the composite of all of those images, maybe 40 images in total, no, more, maybe 100. So we have this sort of composite. Is each one of the photographs that went into making this object, is that an artefact? Is this thing an artefact? This is a 3D printed version of that beautiful object, printed in wood pulp to try and find some, it's a carved wooden object, so by printing it in wood, we're trying to hint at its material qualities, but it isn't the same thing. But is it a thing on its own, or is it just a version of the original? I think that's a really fascinating thing to think about. And does it really make a difference? I think so. This is a wonderful collection from of photographs from Tyne and Weir's archives. It's a set of handling sessions that were organised for a school of blind children. And it's incredibly rich, and it really does give you a sense of the different affordances of touch and why this, following this process all the way through to the printed surrogate actually can give lots of different elements. So that wood pulp helmet, Hyder helmet that you saw in the previous slide was printed for touch tours in the Pitt Rivers that are with blind and partially sighted visitors. So there are lots of great things about digitising and following this process of making all the way through to its logical end. But I think it's really important to close that circle. So the most recent project that we're working on with the Pitt Rivers is an AR experience that allows you to pop the digital objects out of the cases, but you have to be standing right there with the real thing at the same time. So it's trying to kind of close that circle and make sure that the digital encounter is part of a wider experience with the material objects in the museum. And yeah, we're still collecting data about that, but I think it's a really important part of the digital trail is to end up somewhere real. So I'll leave it there and let somebody else talk their turn.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kathryn. I'll introduce our next speaker now, which is Elliott Burns. Elliott is an artist, curator and writer based in London, Mexico City. Elliott is one half of the curatorial duo along with Peter Oriella, who run Offsite Project. Since launching in 2017, Offsite Project has worked with over 70 artists to produce regular micro-zip file exhibitions and Google Maps residency programs, as well as other online and offline projects. So please welcome Elliott Burns.
Yeah. I'm hoping this presentation works as I intended because it's been exported from Keynote, so you never know if the animations are going to go awry. I am Elliott Burns. I'm going to talk a little bit about Offsite Project, which, as Tom mentioned, is an online gallery of sorts that my wife and I co-founded a couple of years ago. The gallery was born out of a sort of necessity for a space when we were moving back and forth between Mexico and London and never really had access to zones, spaces, pop-up galleries to exhibit works and develop our practice. So we started working online, we started with exhibitions that ran from the homepage, then sort of developed what was a downloadable exhibition series where everything was compacted into zip shows, sort of a publication program almost, but in a sort of expanded curatorial format, and then most recently a residency program which takes place within Google Maps. And I'm just going to speak through 3 projects which are examples of each of these programs. So this slide represents an exhibition that we did with an artist called Libby Ponce, who is an Ecuadorian American artist based in Tampa, Florida. And what we have here is just sort of a set of samples of the materials that Libby was sending to us. So there was a long exchange process where she was sending us digital files, which we worked with her in a back and forth communicative fashion to build an exhibition from. The idea of this exhibition was that we would create a virtual space that was the ideal home, domestic environment for her alter ego, Billy Sepon, who is an intergalactic version of the artist travelling back and forth to Earth. So she sent us GIFs and animated files and videos, and together with those we put together a SketchUp model of the exterior of the building. That's gone slightly wrong. And then we modelled in InDesign how the interior would be structured. We did this from different perspectives, looking at the object placement, and then overlaid that with walls which were composed of found footage and videos she had made. So each wall was a 3-dimensional piece as well. And then we composed that into the website design. So the end result was a space you could explore, you could navigate around and see this interior from a central point. So that's just one example of how we build exhibitions. It tends to be relatively collaborative, and it tends to be quite an experimental process where the artist is doing something they haven't done before, and we as curators or technicians almost are learning new coding or design skills to help facilitate that. And that's one shot of the interior when it was finished. Next, this is an example of one of the zip shows we did, a visualization of it with an artist called Neil Willis, whose project was called A Rhizome of the Shiny-Ass Kardashian. So Neil is a coder by practice and has a MA in photography from Central St. Martin's. And for this project, he was looking at the history of the Kardashian family on Twitter, and he wrote code to download, and this may be a little bit wrong, but at the time it was, I believe, 113,192 tweets, and convert them into TXT files. And we presented this as a single zip file, which once opened, people had problems because opening the folder of 113,000 files at once can crash your computer. So we had a few complaints about that. But the idea was it was almost a sort of material culture of what the Kardashians had contributed in about 10 years. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the National Library of the Congress in America has a connection to Twitter. So any tweet enters the library's collection. So it was just almost like a sampling of that to make sense of like what that actually felt like as a bulk of material to navigate through. And we had people who were just sort of randomly jumping in and opening things up and without context going, what does this mean? What was this about? And then the last project I'll show you from our Google Maps residency program. So this is a little video animation of the space. Last year we worked with an artist called Joseph Steele, and in 2017 Joseph travelled to Rojava, which is a region in Syria that is controlled or protected by a coalition of rebel forces against Assad, mainly the YPK, and he faked his way into Syria with a press pass. Interesting tidbit. Real press passes don't work getting into Syria. You have to actually create a fake press pass, because the fake press passes look more real to the border guards who will let you in than the real press passes. And then once he was in Syria, he had connections with the YPK and started traveling with them, but then switched back to his main profession of being an artist, because he sort of had an economy of being able to travel around by drawing portraits of people and integrating with the young men who were fighting and going to parties with them. And a year after he had done this project, made this trip, he retraced it in over 190 different pins and lines and notes and video files that document his time. So it's, as best as he could do, an exact retracing of everywhere he went, the people he met, the things he photographed, the drawings he made, that all came together in a documentary work that he showed at his degree show last year. And there's an interesting sort of disjunction between the terrain of Syria and this quite, volatile thing, and the language of what Google presents, the material nature of how Google renders and annotates the digital globe, which is always this sort of friendly line, this kind of like childlike drawing. So there were these two sort of material cultures coming into quite a sharp juxtaposition here. I'll leave it there. Those are 3 projects, but we've done somewhere around, I think we're up to about 7 Google Maps, somewhere in the range of 18 zip files, and about 11 or 12 exhibitions now. And they're all very different uses of the platform and the mediums. Okay, thank you.